This podcast is for you. Your co-hosts, Ben Dodge and Eric Huso at Effect Epic Consulting, believe that your potential is limitless. Tapping into this potential is how you can affect epic results in your life, relationships, and business. Welcome to the Principles of Epic Growth.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I love this. So, yeah, this podcast with you is always a pleasure. I was trying to explain to somebody the other day what it is that we do with our podcast. And, you know, I'm not sure I can really describe it other than we discuss these principles that can just absolutely, in an epic way, impact your life, right?
Yeah.
And we do it with, you know, a little bit of humor here and there because we're just, you know, those kind of guys. But it's also just an in-your-face discussion most of the time. Like, you know, we don't necessarily... what's the phrase, you know, like pussyfoot around something or beat around the bush, or, you know, it just is what it is. And we just talk about them both plainly and openly and boldly. And today is no departure from that.
Yeah. We're here to make a difference. That's the big thing. And we love the things that we talk about, and we love them because they really have made an impact in our personal lives and in the lives of people that we work with. So today is one of those topics that every single one of us wrestles with on a daily basis because we're human beings. And that topic is fear. So fear is something that, we all have some relationship with. And we're going to try to unpack that relationship, help you see where fear might be using you, where fear is getting in the way, where fear might be limiting some possibilities, where fear might be having a negative impact on relationships that you have, both professionally and personally. So today's going to make a huge difference.
Yes, let me be really clear. If you don't think you're afraid of something, like, you're just dead wrong. There isn't a human being on the planet that's not afraid of something. So, and if you want to go on a subsurface level or a surface level of snakes and spiders and
sharks and public speaking.
Yeah. Public speaking might be deep for some, but yeah, the thing is that's great, but your fear of snakes is probably not inhibiting your character growth as a business leader or as a person, right?
Correct.
Your fear of abandonment or rejection or, you know, let's go down the list, that's going to screw you up royally, and you might not even know it, or worse, you know it, but don't know how to fix it.
Yep.
So
your fear of failure might really be getting in the way of you being a powerful parent.
That's right.
Might be impacting the way that you parent your kids. So, yeah, we all have fear. We all have some relationship with fear. So it's really clear to unpack that relationship and get and see the impact that fear is having on our behavior, our action, our relationships, etc.
So don't take no for an answer when you're looking in the mirror and you want to go down this road with fear. Because like first challenge for you right now, an invitation is to ask yourself what you're really, truly afraid of. This is an open, honest question. You're maybe riding down the road right now, or you're, you know, getting ready for work and you're listening to this, whatever it is, just maybe pause for just a minute, hit the pause button and ask yourself, what am I really, truly afraid of? And be authentic and be open and be present to this, because this is going to set up the whole rest of this podcast.
Yeah.
What am I really afraid of?
So if we were working with you individually and we were in a room together, I wouldn't accept the first answer that you give, because the first answer that you give is going to be really surface, and it's going to be a safe answer, because we want to protect our vulnerability. And so, if you will not give in to the temptation of just staying on the surface, and you'll maybe dig deep and say, well, am I really afraid of that? And why am I afraid of that? Am I really afraid of that? Why am I afraid of that? And get down to like the third or fourth answer that comes up. Now you're really present with something that you're afraid of that's impacting your choices, your behaviors, and your relationships. And
the key is why. You cannot ask too many why questions when you're doing any kind of self-analysis, but especially on this topic, fear. Why? And you'll uncover some really deep-seated things. And so that I say that because most of us sometimes struggle with, well, how do I get a real, honest, deep answer? The solution is to continually ask why. Why? if why am I afraid, or what am I afraid of? Okay, why? Well, let's throw an example out there. I'm afraid of, my wife leaving me. I'm not, but let's just say it is. Maybe I should be. I don't know.
Actually, I was going to talk to you about that.
But let's check it out. So I'm afraid of my wife leaving me. Why? Why? So then you start uncovering things like, well, because I don't think I deserve her, or I don't trust her, or, I'm not worthy of a marriage. You get down to like, it could be rejection, abandonment, all kinds of things, right? Like why? And then get down to the bottom of it and let's reconvene. So we're going to pretend there's a pause. Boop, pause.
Welcome back.
Okay, welcome back. Here we are. Honestly, let's do it.
Okay. So hopefully you've been able to unpack some of these fears that could be driving you, that you previously have been really asleep to the impact it has. Now, there's two real powerful influencers in the world. One is fear and the other is love. And obviously love should be the most powerful influencer in our lives, but when we're asleep to fear, fear can actually overpower love. And so these are the two great forces that motivate behavior, love and fear. And the more that you are intentional with incorporating love and unconditional love for yourself, love for other people, then you can overcome the tendency to have fear drive your personality, and have fear drive your decisions, and have fear drive those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Yeah. So, a good example, I guess, that we're going to use a lot of examples. Let's use fear of public speaking.
I don't have it.
I know, but some do.
Yeah, they do.
And so ask, if you were to be afraid of public speaking, ask yourself, why? Are you really afraid of saying words? I mean, you say words every day.
Right.
So what about saying words in front of people are you afraid of? Are you afraid of that they're not going to like it?
Are you going to pull out tomatoes and throw them at you?
Like they're going to laugh at you? Or you're going to stumble on the words and maybe appear a certain way to your coworkers, colleagues, or audience who's listening? Like, what are you afraid? So if you start asking those why questions, then it's possibly that you're afraid of rejection.
Yeah.
You're afraid of rejection from these people.
Fear of not looking professional. Fear of not looking competent.
Yeah.
Fear of being embarrassed.
Yeah. And if you keep digging, what does that boil down to? Rejection.
Yeah.
In that case, in this example, yeah. They're rejecting you for something, your appearance or the way you talk, or your idea sucks or whatever. So it's all rejection and for most people. And so why? What about rejection? And we'll get to that later when we talk about what I think we've dubbed the circles of fear. Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh, what's the
I love it. The circles of fear, guys. Well, it's like the super antidote.
So most people, their fears are rooted in fear of failure, fear of being embarrassed, fear of rejection. So if you'll look at some of those things that you unpack that you're afraid of, they're rooted in that fear of rejection, that fear of being abandoned, the fear of being embarrassed, the fear of not being good enough. And so really looking at yourself and how you love yourself, how you see yourself, how you judge yourself, and are you somebody who loves yourself unconditionally? Are you someone that can look in the mirror and say, I love you? If you can honestly say that, many of the fears that you might have associated with the fear of not being good enough, they're not even going to be in the way. And in the case of public speaking, if you're in a room and you've got 500 people in front of you that you're talking to, as somebody who's done that frequently, your love for those people out there, you just look at those human beings out there. Look at all these people that are husbands and wives and mothers and fathers and business leaders and difference makers in the world. And I have the privilege of serving these people today. And then you just feel this incredible love for the people that are in front of you, and like your fear goes away. Like it's not about you. You've gotten yourself out of the way, and now you're just there to serve the people that are in the room. And and you've faced your fear in a very powerful way.
Yeah, and you've probably heard with public speaking, especially, like, just imagine him naked. Like, how does that help?
I've never done it.
Like, it doesn't. Look, some of those things that might be pretty classical in some of our folklore, so to speak, as a culture, like that's garbage. Look, I've spoken in front of lots of people as well, and I think a little anxiety and a little fear is kind of a common thing, but it's totally easy to deal with, and we'll talk about how love is obviously a great method. But envisioning them naked doesn't make it better. It just doesn't. Like, it's almost like you're demeaning them. So in case they reject you, like you've got something on them. Like, aha! But I saw you naked in my mind.
Yeah.
Like, so what? Like, who cares? Yeah, pretty funny.
So fear is. If we're going to take a couple steps back and unpack fear, fear is actually a survival tool that we as human beings have. It's something that's unique to us as human beings that our mammal counterparts don't have. So it's part of that survival tool of, if a tiger's around the corner that's going to attack us, we've got to be in a position to run away from that tiger so we don't get eaten up. Okay, and so unfortunately today, there's not a lot of risks of wild animals attacking us and eating us. And so
That's a shame.
Most of the fears that we have are really unfounded. Most of the fears that we have are just lies that we've accepted as possibilities. And so, fear is a liar. That's a principle that I want you to consider. Fear lies to you. And in most cases, if you'll question, why am I really afraid here, you'll see the lie. And you'll see how fear is actually just imposing some false circumstances that the likelihood of them happening are zero.
So let's jump into it, and I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
What's your greatest fear?
My greatest fear is not being good enough.
All right. So this is, by the way, just so everyone knows, this is definitely not scripted.
No.
He had no idea I was going to ask him this question today. So, in the spirit of not accepting the first answer, like, we're going to skip past that rule because Eric's present and to himself and self-aware, on a level that most people aren't. So we're going to accept his first answer today. And that is, he was afraid of not being good enough. So next, let's ask why. Why?
So,
and what do you mean not good enough?
And I'll give one example. A lot of my fears in the past have been rooted in money, of not being good enough to make a certain amount of money, not being worthy enough to make a certain amount of money, not being, and so you get it just has a real negative impact on how you see yourself and such.
Okay, so I get that. Awesome. Let's keep going. And why don't you think you're good enough?
Well, it really goes back to experiences you have when you're a kid. When you're on the playground and you either experienced yourself or were told you weren't good enough. Or a friend that says something that you interpret as, oh, I'm not good enough. And you hear that and you believe it. You believe that lie. And you accept it as truth. And so that becomes an operating paradigm that you just kind of incorporate into your way of being, that I'm not good enough. And then that paradigm filters the way you see your future.
Okay, so this is a very real fear for a lot of people, and you are just self-aware enough to be able to talk about it, so this makes a perfect example. So we're going to keep going through the analysis together, if you're okay with it.
Yeah.
Okay. He's squirming. No, he's not. He's super comfortable.
Why not?
Yeah. All right. So, this can come, and I just want to clarify or recap just a little bit. This fear of I'm not good enough can come from your experiences as a kid. And that can, I mean, that's really common. That can be from friends, or bullies. It can also be from siblings that, mistreated. It can be from parents who didn't necessarily encourage confidence or self-esteem. It could be a lot of things, right?
Come from a coach. It can come from a teacher.
It can come from a lot of places. So how has this fear in your experience impacted you in your life?
Well, for a lot of my adult life, I was asleep to it. I was asleep to the fact that it was impacting me.
Yeah, and so how did it impact you? When you were asleep to it, what was sucky or different about your life?
So I wouldn't call it sucky because I have a good life, but it was limiting.
Yeah, that sucks.
But I didn't realize it at
Sure,
the time.
Sure.
That's why I say
Right.
it wasn't sucky, because I was asleep to the fact that I was playing safe.
Right.
And so I wouldn't take risks. I wouldn't push myself. I wouldn't consider possibilities. I just kind of played it safe.
So everything about financial and professional decisions, probably, I'm just summarizing, and I can do this because I've known him for a long time now,
Yep.
were kind of centered around this culture in your paradigm of life as I need to play it safe because I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of making a lot of money. I might not ever have money. I'm not good enough to be that guy anyways. So
It's a great summary.
I'm going to take this particular job instead of this other one. I'm not going to take a risk and do something that I want to do. I'd rather just do this because I want to play it safe or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I can say, guys, for those listening, that was for years, I would say. That was a paradigm. All right. So let's interject just a little bit here about the circles of fear, because this is going to start to make sense to everyone. Because this fear of I'm not good enough, for you, it related to money. I'd be willing to bet it related to a lot more than money, but
Yeah.
we're going to talk about the money today. So interject here. The circles of fear. This is how you can completely eliminate or significantly reduce and diminish the fear that you have in your life. It's the tools.
Yeah, I wouldn't say eliminate, because as long as you're a human being, you're programmed and wired to have fear, but you will be awake to it, and fear won't use you. You will use fear as an advantageous tool.
Yeah, and I think in some cases you can eliminate it, though. And I'll give the rhinoceros example. But in some cases you can totally eliminate the fear, and in a lot of cases you can at least have the tools to deal with it to where it doesn't paralyze you. It doesn't even feel like it's that big a deal sometimes, and that's amazing. Like, that's so powerful. Mm-hmm. I mean, and this is why the circles of fear, this is something that we've dubbed this morning, the circles of fear, is just a powerful way to deal with it. It's a super tool. First circle, imagine a blank piece of paper, and you're going to draw one circle, okay? And inside that circle, we're gonna put a big P, and we're gonna call that paradigms, perspective. Okay, that's how you view the world. How you view the world is the first part of dealing with your fear. You must be self-aware. You must wake up and recognize that you might be wrong in how you see the world. Now, it's really simple on cheesy examples. So I'll give a cheesy example, but the principle, and this is why we like these, because they're principles, will apply across the board no matter how complex your fear is. So let's step back and talk about a cheesy example. Let's say that I'm super and deathly afraid that any moment a rhinoceros is going to bolt through my office, break the wall down, and stab me in the chest with his horn. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, my perspective of that is that's what's going to happen. That's how I see the world. I'm constantly living every day, looking over my shoulder to see if a rhinoceros is going to, run me over. Now, I live in an urban and suburban world. There are no rhinoceroses. Maybe in a zoo somewhere in our state, there's a couple, but there's definitely none free roaming in my city. Yet I have this fear. So the possibility, it's another reason we use the P for this one. The possibility of that happening is pretty slim. But in my mind, because of the way my perspective is, because of the way my paradigm is, see all the P's, I am assigning that a big possibility and a big probability. So much so that I'm afraid of it. Okay?
Right.
So first step is to look at your paradigm and realize that maybe I'm off. Maybe a rhinoceros isn't anywhere near me right now. And maybe it's not even possible for a rhinoceros to be near me. There's lots of buildings between me and the nearest rhinoceros. Police officers, buildings, cars, all kinds of things that will probably prevent the rhinoceros from actually getting to me today. So perspective, paradigm. You wake up, you become self-aware, you start there. You see that your perspective might be off. Your perspective is just your perspective. It's not the truth. It's just what you think is, because that's how you see the world. Everything from the day you were born until now is going to affect the way you see things. Okay. Your experiences and all that are going to affect it. So if you wake up to the fact that you might be off, you might be wrong, you start with P first. The first circle is perspective. You might be able to eliminate or reduce the fear right away by adjusting the way you view the world. In other words, let's view this as not very probable anymore. Let's view this as not very possible. Now all of a sudden my fear is either gone or almost all the way gone, and I'm not paralyzed or inhibited by it. I'm not anxiously sitting right here looking over my shoulder. Oh shoot, like, is it coming any minute? No, I can focus on what I'm doing right now, which is recording a podcast. I don't have to worry about a rhinoceros just because my perspective or my paradigm has changed. Apply that principle to everything that you might possibly be afraid of and start there. So, now we'll transition back to Eric.
Well, before we transition back to me, let me give another example that's a little more realistic that people could probably connect to.
What, you don't think they can connect to a rhinoceros?
Well,
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah,
man.
because the probability of that happening is zero.
Right. Yeah.
But another great fear, a real fear that people have, is a fear of sharks. So ask yourself, why do you have the paradigm that you have about sharks? You probably saw the movie Jaws when you were a kid.
Oh, dude, that's still,
and that created a paradigm. If you were a child, like I was a child, when you saw Jaws, like that created a paradigm that, like, there's this shark that just come out of the ocean and
reconfirmed every news alert that somebody else got bit.
And you watch CNN and it's like, man, like every other week there's they talk about this shark attack in some part of the world. And so how does that impact your behavior when you go to California and you're at Huntington Beach? And now you can see probably a more real example, a more likely example of how a paradigm influences your behavior. Like, are you scared to go out past your knees in the water?
Yeah.
Are you fearful that those surfers out there, like, are you looking for the shark fin the whole time? That the surfers are about to get attacked by a shark. Yeah. So that's a little more real example of an unlikely thing. The likelihood of you being involved in a shark attack is so minimal, so minimal. But like, how does that paradigm that Jaws created for you as a kid impact your experience when you go to the beach?
Yep. So again, the principle is to start with your paradigm, your own perspective, because through that lens that you're looking at the world, you're assigning probability and possibility. So the first circle is P. So if you're assigning a bigger probability and possibility, like in Eric's shark example, or any example, then you'll see your fear, your anxiety increase. You can see it decrease when you can adjust your paradigm. And to do that, you just have to be self-aware, essentially, and actually face the brutal facts. Like, do it. Face the brutal facts. Don't run away from them. Don't hide from them. Embrace them, face them, and make a better decision. The brutal facts are people get bit by sharks. A whole lot less than they don't get bit by sharks. Like, how often do you see a news report every night saying, and guess what? We had hundreds of thousands of surfers again today, and no one was bit. Like, no, it doesn't happen, right? So just embrace the brutal facts, and you can start adjusting your paradigm. And be careful what you consider a fact. Make sure that you're not twisting that through your own paradigm. So start with paradigm. Let's go back to Eric's example, the fear of I'm not good enough. So we'll start with paradigm first. What, if any, or when can you tell us, if you don't mind sharing at least, I know it's kind of personal, when you first started to see that your view of your worth of not being able to make money was off? How did that come to be for you from a paradigm perspective first?
So I didn't realize that it was off. I really didn't realize it was off. I can remember, when let's see, it was probably 4 years ago. I can't even, my brother-in-law Brent, he said, dude, you got to read this book. It's a really cool book. And it was on the mindset around money, Millionaire Mindset, something like that, by T. Harv Eker. And I read that book and I'm like, holy cow, I have these paradigms of money that I had no idea I had. And I had no idea that I had them. They were driving me, and it was like, it just totally like woke me up to like, oh my gosh, like these paradigms are driving my decisions around money. And here I thought I was making conscious choices around money, but they were paradigms that I had that, were partially programmed in me from the way I was raised, partially programmed in me from the environment that I was in. So like, there was a time in my childhood where we had a lot of money. And then there was a real estate crisis in the late 80s here in Arizona, and my dad was involved in real estate, and we went from having a ton of money to eating oatmeal and powdered milk for breakfast, and like literally had nothing. And if it wasn't for family, like we would have lost our home and lost everything. Like it was like really dire. And so that was that's my early years in high school when we went through that time. And so that had a huge impact on my paradigm. And so, you gotta, you could lose everything. And so that, I realized that had an impact on some of the ways that I saw money.
So so what I'm hearing you say is the first time that you figured out that you might not be good enough as it relates to money was when a friend or a relative suggested you read this book, and all of a sudden you saw something for the first time, right? Yeah. You saw a new concept or an idea or a new paradigm for the first time, and you're awake to that now. And how did that change things for you?
Well, it wasn't an overnight change for me.
Never is.
Okay. But it woke me up to how paradigms were filtering how I saw the world, and specifically how I saw money. And for me, what I saw was money was like an essential, like food, water, oxygen, and money. Like you can't live without oxygen. You can't live without food. You can't live without water. And I treated money like it was one of those essentials. Like, plug your nose, hold your breath, and have somebody hold you underwater, and think of that fear of like, I can't breathe. That's how I treated money. Like the thought of running out of money, the thought of not having enough money was like, I can't breathe. And so it caused me to never, put myself at risk of not losing money, put myself at risk of not having enough money, I would hoard money, I would not spend money, etc., because that paradigm was driving how I saw the world. That money was as essential as air and water.
Yeah, and in the context, though, you're not good enough for it. Right, there's a difference there. I mean, a deeper layer to it. But you're right. Yeah, your paradigm about money was rooted first in, I'm not good enough for it. I don't know that I can make it always. I better hoard it. I don't deserve what I have, so I better hang on to it. I can't spend it. Remember that I'm not good enough is a really deep thing there. And so the paradigm was your first line of attack. So let's draw another circle. Because that was able to open your eyes, and you could start working on things, and you could potentially start reducing your fear around you're not good enough, and start finding ways to maybe change the way you approach the whole money thing. So then,
can I give one suggestion, something that helped me before we go on to this? So something that helped me is, okay, if you had $1 million in the bank, how would you feel? And at the time, it'd be like, I put a smile on my face, like, okay, I can relax. Like I got I'm good. Okay. And the realization is, I don't have $1 million in the bank. It was just the thought of having $1 million in the bank. So that just showed me the power of how I think about money. Just the thought of having $1 million in the bank provided that relief. And the thought of not having money was what was creating that fear. And so I had to become awake that it was my thoughts about money that were the problem.
Right.
Money wasn't the problem. It was my thoughts about money that were the problem. And so then when I could then direct my thoughts in powerful, positive ways, intentional ways, then the fears were put in their proper place.
Sure. Yeah, again, paradigm. Paradigm and perspective is the first step in dealing with fear, guys. And you have to wake up and realize that you might not be seeing things the right way. And so in Eric's case, he was able to identify that just the way he thought about things affected the way he viewed it, and he could change, he could start making changes because he was able to see how he saw and saw that was wrong. See how he saw and saw that was wrong. How about that? But that's what it was. All right, so let's draw another circle. There's 3 circles in the circles of fear, and all 3 of them are potentially necessary in dealing with fear, depending on your fear and the level and the depth of it, right? And the kind of fear. So we'll draw another circle, and it's going to slightly overlap or intersect the other circle, okay? So 2 circles, and they slightly overlap or intersect. And this second circle, we're going to label that with an R. You can label it however you want to, but for now, today, we're going to label it with an R, and that's going to stand for your relationship. Your relationship with yourself. Okay? This is your self-esteem, your self-worth. Your ability to have value in your own eyes of yourself, despite anybody else's comments, concerns, judgments, despite what the world might think of you, and so forth. Okay? So let's draw that circle, and it's going to slightly overlap the P with your paradigm, perspective, probability, responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for those of you that are teachers, we call this a Venn diagram. Okay. So we're building this Venn diagram with 3 overlapping circles. I like your word of art. My personal word in there is going to be love, where you have unconditional love for yourself. Yeah. Too many times we put conditions on our love of ourselves, where we can't just look at ourselves and say, I love you exactly the way you are, you're perfect the way you are, and I just love being you.
Yeah, I love that too. Let's do that. So, but remember, this is love of yourself. Mm-hmm. This isn't a pride, arrogant kind of love. This is unconditional relationship love with yourself. In other words, you accept yourself, you forgive yourself, you love yourself. You tolerate yourself, you move on, and you improve yourself. This is a relationship of yourself. Okay, this is self-esteem, and go read the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. It's a fantastic book. Yeah. It'll literally change your life. So the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, or in this case, we're going to say love. All right. So in the fear that Eric's talking about, it's a little bit different than the rhinoceros fear. Okay. In this particular fear, we're talking about I'm not good enough fear. First and foremost, we start with the paradigm or the perspective. We see that we might be seeing this wrong, that maybe money isn't this big evil thing, and that maybe I should try and get some of it. Yet I don't feel like I deserve it still. So my perspective has changed, and I'm going to start making efforts. And as you said, it's not an overnight process, right? It's just not all of a sudden a light switch flipped and you weren't afraid anymore about that you're not good enough. So now we go to this next layer of this love of yourself. And this is going to happen for people with fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, all of these really deep fears. And I'll tell about a massage therapist story I had just the other day. But in this scenario with Eric, the next step would be if he were to strengthen, and he did, his relationship with himself, and his self-esteem were to be high, regardless of whether or not he had money, then he wouldn't feel like he wasn't good enough. See, not feeling like you're not, if you feel like you're not good enough is a direct association to a self-esteem issue. Mm-hmm. Directly, right? And he's just self-aware enough to be able to put that label on it. You got to ask yourself enough why questions to be able to say things exactly like he did, like to the point where you can say, yeah, I was afraid. I'm afraid that I'm not good enough. It's my deepest fear. And we're relating it today with money, but it can seep into your relationships with spouses, as it can seep into your relationship with your kids. If you're not good enough as a parent, you're afraid you're not good enough, or at work, you're afraid you're not good enough for the position you have or the position you want. Yep. Right? Like go on and on, guys. Like this is a fear that we can all deal with. So the next stage after perspective is to identify your self-esteem issues and start working there, because then it's but what if not, right? So, okay, I got my perspective down and I don't have a big probability or possibility assigned to making money anymore. But what if I fail at doing it still, right? What if I don't make it? What if the
economy crashes?
Yeah. What if what if somehow I'm not good enough? Well, because that's the fears. I'm not good enough. Then in this case, your self-esteem is going to really help you. Or the abandonment issue. So this is a great time to interject with, because this is also a realistic story. I had a friend the other day. I asked, hey, what's your biggest fear? And very self-aware person. And she said, my biggest fear is my husband's going to leave me. Like, without hesitation, she talked about it, almost tearfully. And I was like, whoa. So I started asking the why questions, right? Come to find out, her dad left her when she was like 11 years old, left the family and, the whole deal. She ended up growing up without her dad, basically, and then got married and had a relationship with a first husband who basically emotionally abandoned her and went into, all kinds of bad decisions, and then they eventually got divorced, and she felt abandoned and alone. And then she married this next person who is a rock star, like a total stud, like a wonderful upgrade. She's like, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And to this day, though, she can wake up in the middle of the night with a nightmare of him leaving her. Her fear of abandonment. So if she were to assign, and she'll recognize that there's no way that that's possible. If she were to really be honest with herself, she's like, this guy loves me, I love him, there's no way he's going to leave me. Yet she's still assigning some possibility or probability there. So her paradigm still needs some work. But in the meantime, she can work on her self-esteem too. And this is the love thing. If she were to say, okay, even if he did leave me, this is the even if part, or the but what if not part. Even if he did leave me, I still am an amazing person. I'm a great catch. It will suck, but maybe I can find somebody else, or I can do this on my own. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm afraid of abandonment. So what is it? Are you afraid of being a mother by yourself then? Are you afraid of parenting on your own? Are you afraid of not being able to make enough money? What is it? Like, there's a bunch of whys there, right? And so if you had a high enough self-esteem, you can now reduce your fear even more. But like, okay, I got this. But even if this fear happens and I assign it a low probability, I still got this. And that's, so with Eric and money, it's the same thing. His relationship with himself will have increased, and he'll start to say, like, I got this. Even if I don't make all the money that I want to, or even if I try and I take a risk that you wouldn't have normally taken before, you said, right? Now all of a sudden I'm going to take a risk and take this particular job. Your self-esteem is higher now. So you're like, I still got this even if it doesn't work out. And has that happened? Have you taken risks since then? Have you taken jobs you didn't think you would do? And how's that worked out for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It resulted in a career change. It resulted in you and I doing some things together like this, and it's resulted in new possibilities and new opportunities that never would have come to me.
Yeah, it's incredible, by the way, from a third-party perspective, to sit and see what's happened over the last few years. And now we have this consulting company together, and we get to talk about this kind of stuff with people all the time. It's fantastic. All right, just for time's sake, let's go into the third circle. And then,
before we go to the third circle,
just kidding.
Let me give an application for the self-worth and the love circle that we were just talking about. So, forgiveness is the actionable item that you can do, where okay, so what do I do? How do I love myself more? How do I overcome this fear of abandonment? And the answer is in forgiveness. You have to forgive yourself. You have to forgive yourself for judging yourself. Like all those years of saying you weren't good enough. Like, what? I forgive you for misjudging yourself.
Yeah.
To your dad who abandoned you, you have to forgive your dad that abandoned you. To your first husband that abandoned you, you have to forgive your first husband. And et cetera, et cetera. Like, forgiveness is the key. If your parents gave you a paradigm that was really limiting, you have to stop blaming your parents for the paradigm that they gave you and forgive them. For the kid that bullied you in junior high because you were fat, you have to forgive that kid that bullied you in junior high. Like, forgiveness is the actionable item that will expand the love. Okay?
That's right.
So you've got a space called your world, and it's either going to be filled with fear or love. Just like gases, gases expand to fill the space that they're in. And there's two gases in your world, and that's fear and love. And if you are limiting love through non-forgiveness, then fear is going to expand and fill that space. And fear is going to result in you, acting non-powerfully. You're going to act with anxiety or not act with,
Right.
it's just going to impact your behaviors and your paradigms, etc. So your actionable item is forgive. Who do you need to forgive that will allow you to release those paradigms that are limiting you?
I love it. Thank you. All right. So let's draw one more circle. This is our last circle for the circles of fear. And this circle is going to slightly overlap and intersect the other two circles. All right. So like in a classic Venn diagram, there'll be one little point in there where all three overlap. And there'll be points where just two overlap. And there's, of course, plenty of space where there's just, part of one circle available. You'll find after we draw this last circle that depending on the fear, you can deal with it in one and or two and or maybe three of these circles. Depending on the fear, you might not need all three. Depending on the fear, you might need all three. Okay? So it just depends. That's why they're great. So identifying your fear, asking the why questions will help you figure out where to place it, and then you can start making intentional efforts to fix it. And then what? Then what happens? You're liberated. Mm-hmm. Right? Okay. Last circle. Slightly overlaps the other two. This one we're going to call action.
Take action.
We're going to call this one action. And let me explain what that means. Action is very related to your confidence. And confidence is not self-esteem. Self-confidence and self-esteem are completely different. Self-esteem is your relationship with yourself. Confidence is basically your confidence in your own abilities or preparation or skill set or whatever. So in this case, when we're talking about action, we're actually talking about doing something about it that can reduce or eliminate your fear. So let's go back to the cheesy rhinoceros example, because when we reduce it to something simplistic, it's easier to understand the principle, at which point you can take it later and apply it to your own fears. If my paradigm or perspective is that a rhinoceros is going to run me over any day now or any second, right? And I'm stuck there and I can't fix my paradigm just yet. I can wake up to the fact that that's off and I can start working on my paradigm. But as Eric told in his personal story, that doesn't always happen overnight. In the meantime, I can take action because the rhinoceros running me over has nothing to do with my self-worth probably. It's just not one of those fears that's going to necessarily relate to loving myself.
Unless you see yourself as not as strong as a rhinoceros.
Sure.
Or not as fast as a rhinoceros.
Sure. There's always a possibility, but this is why there's this other circle. And that's why they all three interlap or intersect and overlap, because you might need all three. But in this case, we're going to just use the example of paradigm and action. So if I really feel and fear like some rhinoceros coming in any second to run me over, then I can take some action. I can start fortifying my office and building a wall, hiring security guards, wearing a chest plate, and a helmet and all kinds of stuff, right? I can take action. Most of us have experienced this in school or in life in general, where we've got some big test coming up or some big presentation at work or whatever. The more we take action in our preparation for said event, the direct correlation is our fear reduces accordingly, right? If you show up and just try and wing something, remember the anxiety there. Right? You didn't prepare for a test and you're like, oh shoot. Like let's say there's a pop quiz and you didn't have any idea that there was going to be a pop quiz and your teacher said that and you're like, oh man, that sucks. Your fear is like through the roof. What if you happen to get an insider tip that there's a pop quiz and you spent a couple hours the night before preparing for it and the teacher said there's a pop quiz and you're just sitting there smirking like, I got this. Preparation obviously is a direct derivative of action. And so your action towards whatever it is that you fear, so that this is a way you can deal with your fear and or eliminate it, right? You can take action. The sharks is a great example as well. If you can't wrap your head around the fact that your paradigm or perspective might be off on a shark bite, what can you do about the sharks? Like you can go swimming in a shark tank then in the ocean, right? I mean, if you're going to be that extreme, you can, and then you've dealt with the fear. So those are easy examples on this principle. I get that it gets complicated when we're talking. So with Eric, the fear of I'm not good enough, what action did you take?
Great question. So at the time, my wife and I had been married 19 years.
And they're still married, by the way.
Yeah. So this was about 4 years ago. And in 19 years of marriage, I had never taken her on a vacation. Just her and I. Now we had gone places for work. So like I would go do some training or speaking somewhere out of state and I'd bring her with me. but it was always a working thing. Work was paying for travel, work was paying for the hotel, work was paying for the car, and she would come with me when we would do those things. But never did I take my wife in 19 years, just her and I, on a vacation. Okay? And so I booked a trip to Hawaii and took her to Hawaii. And I even when we went to we check in, we fly in, we're at this is just to show you my mindset. We fly in, we go to the rental car place, and they're like, hey, we have an abundance of convertibles. Would you like to upgrade your car to a convertible? First question, how much does it cost? Like it's $60 for the week. And you know what? I had to wrestle with that. I wrestled with $60 to have a convertible in Hawaii. But at this time, I'm waking up to my paradigm like, you know what? We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. I'm gonna splurge, and we're gonna spend the extra $60, and we're gonna have the convertible. And so, still to this day, driving the road to Hana, for those who've been to Hawaii, to Maui, that road to Hana with all those waterfalls and the vegetation that lines the streets, I can't imagine having driven that with a roof on my head. Like that convertible just made the difference all the world. Just driving around there with the sun shining on you and the wind blowing through, like just incredible, the experience we had because of that convertible. And so that's what I did. I started to take action that would shatter those paradigms. So the thought of, well, what if we wouldn't have enough money to do this or do that? And so, since then, we've, I don't abuse money or misuse money, but like I've loosened the purse strings and we've done some things. So that's what I did. I took action. I took my wife to Hawaii.
He took lots of action, yeah. So he, from going on no vacations, all kinds of vacations, to taking different jobs and taking chances there, starting to deal with, I'm not good enough, with, well, I'm going to take action and show that I am good enough. And all of this together, from paradigm to self-esteem, love, and actually taking action, he's literally transformed his life around the fear of I'm not good enough as it relates to money. And in the same scenario, he's done the same thing with I'm not good enough in all the other areas of his life too, that we can save for another day. So taking action is like the cherry on top. For some people and some fears, it might not be a love or self-esteem issue. It might just be action in paradigm. And for other people, it might not be so much action as it is just paradigm and self-esteem. And for some, instances, it might just be paradigm, right? Mm-hmm. And for some, it might just be some self-esteem issues, and your paradigm's okay, but you got to work on the self-esteem. So that's why this diagram is amazing. The circles of fear. It's like one of the greatest keys to unlock, the limits that you're putting on yourself that you might not even know are there, by the way. So Eric lived most of his life not even knowing that he was limited. His fear controlled his decisions of how to work, where to work, how to save money, how to spend it, what to do, what not to do. Like, for example, 19 years of not taking his spouse on a vacation, for crying out loud. I mean, you can live a whole chunk of your life not knowing, right? So waking up, looking at your paradigm, making sure your relationship with yourself, whether you're forgiving yourself, loving yourself, you've got this even if it doesn't work out. That's the attitude there. It's not just optimism. That's false or vain optimism isn't going to get you anywhere. It's actually knowing and solid feeling like I'm good, I'm okay, I got this even if it doesn't work out. And then going into the action part where it's a resolute determination, by the way. It's not just taking action, it's being committed. It's being intentional and clear on those intentions. You're being authentic. Authenticity is going to apply in yours self-esteem and love circle, as well as in your paradigm circle, and as well as in your authentic. I mean, all of these principles that we've talked about in the past are going to feed into how these circles actually work, the circles of fear. And in those instances where you need to overlap all three, you'll find the light at the end of the tunnel when you do so. Yeah. You'll begin to emerge. You'll begin to feel different. So how do you feel Like literally, how do you feel now? I mean, I knew you
It's
back
beautiful.
then.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. You live free. You know that, and that's the whole purpose of our work, is to help people really put into practice these principles that help you live free. They're principles of epic growth. And as great as you are, we want to help you be an upgraded version of yourself, where you can free yourself of some of the things that have limited you in the past. So, you know, part of doing the work is some mental work as well. Like in the shark example, like do the math. Like, what are the odds of you getting bit by a shark? And compare that to the odds of you getting in a car wreck.
Yeah, facing the brutal facts. The facts are that you're probably not going to really get bit.
Around money, you know, I had to face some facts. Like, how many days of my life have I not been able to put food on the table? 0. How many days have I not been able to make my house payment? I've never missed a house payment, ever. My kids have never experienced not having a roof over their head. And so some of these fears of, well, what if I wouldn't be able to provide for my family? What if that were driving my behaviors? Like, I had to, you know, get real with it. Like I've never not been able to provide for my family. So I am good enough. I am a good enough provider. So stop acting as if you're not going to be able to provide for your family, and act with intention and powerfully on what you're wanting to do. So I'll give you some examples of how I practiced facing fears. Like another fear I have is cold water. Cold water is like, oh, hate that. And so my way of being around water when it's cold is I tiptoe through it. So in the swimming pool, I get in the first step and I let my feet warm up. And then I get to the second step and I let up to my knees warm up. And then I get the third step. And you know, that third step, that's the like, ooh, that's the danger zone, you know, you're like, oh. Then once I get into the danger zone, then I'll, but that's my way of being around water. And so when I do that, sometimes I'll tease with my kids, and then I'll let my kids like push me in, because they like trying to push me in. So I'll act like I'm going in this step, and then we'll end up in this wrestling match, and let my kids throw me in the pool. But sometimes in the shower, I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to turn the hot water on. I'm going to get in the shower, and it's going to be freezing cold. I'm going to face that fear of cold water. I'm going to put myself in an uncomfortable position. That simple thing has helped me to take action in other areas where I'm afraid. So find something simple, like if you're afraid of cold water, that you could just face that fear.
So just to put it into the circles of fear diagram, that's action. That's also paradigm. By taking action, you're forcing yourself to realize that cold water is not that bad. Whereas your perspective would have been cold water sucks, it's bad. You see what I'm saying? So always look at these circles and see where you can do. Sometimes you can use one of the other ones to get into the other circle, right? And in this case, use action. 2 final thoughts. One, for me at least, one is on the abandonment issue. That's a real deal for a lot of us. On the abandonment fear, we talked about the perspective paradigm and the probability, like her husband's really probably not going to leave her because he loves her to death and he's this total stud, he's never cheated, never will, kind of a thing. She still is worried about that, right? But if she works on her self-esteem, then she'll be like, okay, I've got this, even if he doesn't, even if he does leave me, but if she fixes first the paradigm and the perspective, she's going to be okay there, facing the brutal facts. What about the action part for her? The action will be, if he does leave me, am I afraid that I'm not going to be able to provide for my family financially? Am I afraid that I'm going to be lonely and not have any company at night, or whatever the fear boils down to? And there's probably a whole lot more than just one thing. That's where you start taking action. In other words, it's like preparing yourself for that public speaking engagement that you're terrified of. If you really, really prepare yourself, you write a really good speech and you really, really rehearse it over and over again, you're going to be less afraid. So in her case, depending on what those fears are, it could be, okay, I'm going to go back to school and get an education just in case. Or I'm going to start, making some social network friends where I feel like I have support just in case. And there's a benefit to that either way, right? In her life, it'll be enriched from these friendships and relationships. But there's action that can be taken that can, reduce or diminish the fear. And again, in some cases, depending on the fear, you can even eliminate your fear. So if I
could say one thing, I would eliminate the mindset of just in case, because that's actually rooted in fear, and it could just, you'd be trading one fear for another fear.
Sure. But
be really intentional. Like, no, I'm going to get an education because I love learning and because learning opens up these possibilities for me. That's that's a position of loving yourself and loving learning and loving this content and loving the opportunity to serve.
I totally agree. There's still a preparation element there, and preparation will help eliminate fear, and preparation is part of action. And you don't have to say just in case, but you can be prepared.
Absolutely.
And being prepared will help reduce or eliminate some of the fears that you might have. And then the final thought that I'll share is there's an article on mentalhealth.org, mentalhealth.org.uk. So it's obviously from, across the pond there. And they talk about, it's a very good article about how to overcome fear and anxiety. It's interesting after they do this huge analysis as to what fear is, and I don't, you don't have to read so much about what fear is. It's pretty easy to identify. But anyways, at the very bottom of the article, it's how can I help myself? I'm going to just read the titles. I'm not going to read the words, the paragraphs underneath, but the titles all fit, almost all of them, into paradigm, and maybe one or two into action. Check this out. Face your fear if you can. So this is like you in the cold water. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's paradigm perspective. Know yourself. And they're talking about keeping a diary and figuring out what it is that really makes you fear. Also,
which is becoming awake to your paradigm.
That's going to be paradigm and perspective, right? Try to learn more about your anxiety or your fear and why and where it might be coming from. Paradigm perspective. Yep. Then they start doing things like exercise. If you exercise, it'll take your mind off your fear. Okay, so I think that's a terrible thing. I think exercise is fantastic, but you don't want to be distracted from your fear. You want to deal with your fear. In this case, exercise could potentially be action, but it's more of a distraction. So relax. Relaxation techniques can help you, like yoga, meditation, things like that will just help you get to a space where you can think about your fear in a different light. I think that's also still paradigm and perspective. Mm-hmm. It's all different techniques, by the way, that you can start to look at your fear. Healthy eating, that results in just a physical change for some people that clarifies the mind, is what they're saying here. Like reducing your coffee and caffeine intake and eating healthy will reduce the stress on your body and open up your mind to be able to what? Think about your fear in a different way. Paradigm perspective. These are all things that will help paradigm perspective. Avoid alcohol or drink in moderation. Same. Paradigm perspective. Then complementary therapy. So everything from, again, meditation and yoga, Tai Chi, things like that, different exercises that will help you unlock and open your mind. And then, of course, there's things like going to therapy and having somebody walk you through some of this stuff. Paradigm perspective, that can also be self-esteem, some of those that are right there. But very interesting how most everything that they're talking with as techniques to help with fear put you in a state where you can start to identify what the fear really is. That's why these circles are so powerful. It puts a really good practical label on things and a process by which you can self-analyze and self-implement things and get better. Just literally just live free. Yeah. Love it. I love it, guys. There's no reason to totally live your life in fear. And worse, for those of you who don't even know you're afraid of stuff, let's figure that out. Let's wake up and realize what limitations you actually have. Think about it at work. Are you afraid that you shouldn't really get that job? Are you afraid that if you try, you're not going to get it? Why? Is it a self-worth issue? Is it, what's going on there? And then let's start dealing with those fears. Absolutely reach out to us. And we've just touched the surface here, right? Yeah. Like this is so deep. This is so deep. We could spend hours and days talking about fear and such. So feel free to reach out to us. Like if we've unpacked something in your mind here today that you're like, hey, we need to have a conversation about this with you. Like, reach out to us. Give Ben a call. Give me a call. Shoot us a text or email. Yeah, please do. We'd love to help. Let's have a conversation about it. Like, we didn't even talk about how fear can propel you to do incredibly amazing things. It's happened. It happens a lot. Coaches use it all the time to get athletes to do amazing things, right? But that doesn't make fear necessarily a good thing, right? So, anyways, there's just so much there. We didn't even talk about using fear to parent, and that's one of the biggest challenges I see with parents and their struggles with their kids is their fear-based parenting. We didn't even touch that. Right. So trust your kid, teach your kid, trust your kid. Yeah, I love it. Love your kids. Yeah, that's all it. Right. Thanks, guys. Have a great one. Don't be afraid. We'll see you.
Thanks for listening to the Principles of Epic Growth podcast, your path to epic performance and life with incredible growth.